I want you to think about the last time you were completely alone outside at night. Not walking to your car in a parking lot. I mean, really alone. A dark road, a campsite, a cabin in the woods. Somewhere so quiet that you can hear every little sound around you. Now imagine suddenly getting the overwhelming feeling that something is watching you. And not just watching you, but studying you. Because today's episode is a little different. We're stepping away from ghosts and hauntings, and we're talking about something much more physical. Something people describe as huge, fast, intelligent, something that stays just out of sight right along the tree line. And whether you believe in Bigfoot or not, all of the stories I've collected are very similar. The silence, the smell, the footsteps, and the feeling that you are being followed. And everybody said the same thing afterward, that whatever they saw was not a bear, it wasn't a human, and they really don't know what it was. Hey friends, welcome back to the Spooky Files. If you're returning, thank you so much for coming back. If you're new here, I'm so glad to have you. I'm your host, Mary Ellen Quigley. This is where we dive into the paranormal, the unexplained, the I swear I saw something, but I don't want to admit it moments that we all have and now have a place to talk about them. Today's episode, we are talking about Bigfoot encounters. And look, I know some people 100% believe there's a Bigfoot. There's so many theories on it, but I'd like to think that if there isn't really a Bigfoot, there's some kind of creature out there. And today we're going to get into some firsthand experiences that people have had. So grab a cup of coffee, get comfortable, and let's get into it. Our first story is called The Tree Line, and this person wanted to be anonymous. They said, "Hi, Mary. I grew up in a rural part of Tennessee, and for years I convinced myself that it was my imagination, but now that I'm older, I don't think it was. When I was growing up, our house sat at the edge of a huge wooded area. There were no neighbors behind us for miles. And as a kid, I loved it because there was so much room to play. During the day, it wasn't an issue. But the woods at night felt completely different. And there was one area behind our property that always bothered me. A break in the trees about 50 yards back. You could see it from our kitchen window. And I hated looking that way after dark, but not because I ever saw anything at first, but because it always felt like something was standing there watching us. You could feel the eyes from that section, but you never actually saw anything. But one night when I was about 16, my parents were gone for the evening and I was washing dishes around midnight. I happened to glance out toward the tree line. At first, I thought it was a person standing out there. But then I realized that whatever I was looking at was way too tall. Even from a distance, I could tell it was enormous. It had to have been 7 or 8 feet tall, maybe taller. And it wasn't moving around like a person would. It was just standing there, completely still. And I remember freezing with my hands still in the sink holding a dish and trying to convince myself that maybe it was a tree stump, but then it moved. Just a slight step sideways, enough for the moonlight to hit it. And that's when I saw dark hair, broad shoulders, and that it was way too large to be a human. I swear to you, it tilted its head like it knew I was watching. And I backed away from the window as fast as I could. Every instinct in my body was telling me not to look out again, but eventually I forced myself to peek outside and it was gone. The next morning, I walked out to where I had seen it, and this is the part that still shakes me, is that there were footprints in the mud near the tree. They were not shoes or footprints, but massive paw prints. They were bigger than any human foot I had ever seen. That's the only time I saw it, but we definitely felt it, and we had a lot of weird things happen around our house that I think came from whatever this creature was in the woods. So, being out in the woods at night anyway and having a long, dark tree line that you could see from your windows of your house would already freak me out. I love being rural and I love the idea of peace and quiet, but there's something about being isolated, especially in the woods, that just would do me in. So, that would already be scary, but then to feel like you're being watched from the woods all the time, I could not do it, so props to your family for staying there as long as you did, but definitely creepy, and I think the fact that you were being watched is what makes it even the most scary. I'm glad you never saw anything after that, but I don't actually know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, so you'll have to let me know, but thank you for sharing your story with us, and it definitely sounds like Bigfoot to me. All right, story number 2. This one comes from John, who is a truck driver. And he said, "Hi, Mary. I'm a truck driver and I've spent most of my life on the road. I've seen deers, bears, coyotes, all kinds of things at night. If it's a weird animal, I've probably seen it. But I have never seen anything like this. I was driving through northern Michigan during the winter. It was around 2 o'clock in the morning, and I was driving down a mostly empty back road, trying to avoid highway construction. I had been delayed during the day, so instead of pulling over to sleep, I decided to drive through the night for a few hours to make up some lost time. It was just trees, snow, and empty roads, and I loved how quiet everything felt. Driving in the middle of the night is actually my favorite time to drive. But suddenly, something stepped into the road. I mean, it crossed the road in maybe 3 strides. At first, I thought it was a bear, but the second it hit my headlights, I knew it wasn't because this was standing upright, completely upright, like a person, and its shoulders were higher than the hood of my truck. Dark brown hair covered all of its body, and I could see long arms swinging as it moved. The way it walked is what bothered me the most because it didn't move like an animal. It was walking completely like a person, except there's no way that this was human. I slammed on my brakes so hard that I almost jackknifed my truck. The thing stopped in the middle of the road for a few seconds and looked directly at me, and I can still picture the eyes in the headlights because they weren't glowing or even creepy, just intelligent, like it knew who I was and what we were doing on the road. And then it took 3 massive steps off the side of the road and disappeared. I sat there gripping my steering wheel for probably a full 5 minutes before I could move again. I didn't tell anybody about this for a long time because honestly, I sound insane, but I know what I saw and it was not a bear. I'm pretty sure I encountered Bigfoot in northern Michigan. Northern Michigan may not be what you think of when you're thinking of Bigfoot encounters. Most of us tend to think of like being out in the mountains or heavily wooded remote areas. But the truth is that Bigfoot has been seen in almost every country and every continent in the world. Other cultures may have a different name or slightly different description, but for the most part, we're all seeing the same creature. And I think the part of this story that is the most scary is the fact that they locked eyes. They were looking at each other, and that this creature seemed to be intelligent and to know what was going on. It's just scary to think that there's a creature out there that is so widely seen, but we're not really sure what it is. I would love to know some of your opinions at the end of this episode of what you think it is, and I will share with you guys what I think it might be. Story number 3 is called The Cabin. This one was sent in by Vanessa. And Vanessa says, "Hi, Mary. This happened during a cabin trip with 4 of my friends, and none of us talk about it anymore. A group of us rented a cabin in West Virginia for a long weekend. It was very isolated with no cell service, just woods in every direction. But we wanted to truly disconnect from the internet and from social media and from family. So we wanted a remote location where we could hang out, talk, read books, and just relax. The first night was very normal, but the second night was when things started getting weird. Around midnight, we heard footsteps outside, heavy footsteps. Not like a person walking quickly, but like a deliberate, slow walk around the cabin, as though they were trying to be as quiet as possible and were just really bad at it. But it made no sense to us because, again, we were in a remote cabin in the middle of nowhere, so there shouldn't have been anyone nearby. And the host would have told us if they were coming by in the middle of the night. So at first we thought that maybe it was a deer, but then we heard the breathing, which is what made us think it had to have been a person. But it was deep, heavy breathing. So one of my friends pulled the curtain back for a second and then let it go just as quickly. She looked completely pale, and we kept asking what she saw, but she wouldn't answer at first. Then she said, "It's too big." That's all she kept repeating. About 10 minutes later, something hit the side of the cabin, hard enough to shake the wall. And then came 3 knocks on the window, high up, way too high for a normal person to reach from the outside. We were all freaking out at this point. Nobody wanted to look outside again. And then came the smell. I don't know how to describe it other than a wet animal mixed with sewage. It was overwhelming. One of my friends started crying because she was so scared. And for the next 2 hours, we heard movement outside, footsteps, branches snapping, heavy breathing. At one point, whatever this was walked across the porch so heavily that the floorboards shook underneath us. None of us slept. And the second the sun came up, we packed everything and left. When I called the host, they were confused. They even said, "We don't have neighbors for miles, and no one should be there on property." They seemed just as confused as we were. After we got out of the area and I finally talked to the friend who looked out the window, they said that what they saw looked like Bigfoot. I don't know whether we actually encountered Bigfoot or not, but I can tell you that whatever this was absolutely terrifying. And after that, we decided that we would no longer rent cabins where there was no cell phone service. Look, I'm not going to lie, the no cell service, I'd have been done. Because if I can't call for help, I'm out. But I appreciate the sentiment because I often think that, hey, I just need to disconnect and get away from everybody. But I can only imagine how terrifying that would be. Even if it wasn't Bigfoot, right? Even if it was just a person or something, the idea that this thing is circling the cabin for hours, making noises, and you have no way to get help. You don't have a phone. There's nobody nearby. You're literally in the like, I would be so terrified. And I don't know. I would be done with cabin excursions after that. So I get it. And I think you guys did the right thing by just getting out of there because whatever that was potentially could have came back on the next night. But how terrifying is that? And I would be curious to see if the owner maybe has had other guests that have similar experiences. They're probably not going to tell you, obviously, because they don't want to ruin business. But I'm thinking that that cannot be the only encounter that's happened at that cabin. I would love to know if there were more stories similar to yours that maybe the owner just isn't telling anybody. So, look, maybe there's a logical explanation for stories like these. Maybe some people could say it was a bear standing upright, or maybe fear fills in the blanks. Maybe it is some kind of animal, but your mind kind of fills in the blanks for you and makes you think something else. Maybe isolation does strange things to the mind. I don't know. What I do know is that the watching, the silence, the smell, the size of this creature, whether you believe in Bigfoot or not, all of that is absolutely terrifying. And I think most people that spend enough time in the woods will have an experience that they can't quite explain. The woods is full of just strange experiences in general. I personally believe that Bigfoot is real, and my belief is that Bigfoot is just some kind of animal that we have not identified yet that has just existed for all time, and that's why we see them all around the world. But I would be curious what you guys think of Bigfoot. Do you think this is some kind of paranormal being? Do you think it's just another animal? What do you think? Because I love hearing everyone's theories on this. But in the meantime, if you decide to go out tonight and you're anywhere near the woods, and if it suddenly goes quiet and you get that feeling that something's watching you, you may want to pay attention because maybe you're not alone out there. And that brings us to the end of this episode of The Spooky Files. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend. Follow me on social media. Leave a comment because I love hearing from all of you. If you have a story you'd like me to share on the podcast, you can send it to thespookyfilespodcast@gmail.com or fill out the contact us form on thespookyfilespodcast.com. I read every single email or message, and this helps build a community of people that don't just love a spooky story, but want a place to talk about all the things we don't always admit out loud. Make sure to follow or subscribe so you don't miss the next episode. If you're looking for more paranormal content, check out my other podcast, Hoosier Myths and Legends, where my sister and I share all things spooky from the state of Indiana. We're dropping season 7 on May 30th. Until next time, stay curious, stay safe, and keep it spooky, my friends.